I'm sure you've seen the plethora of videos on YouTube these days where people go to British cities and chart the decline. They see the decaying infrastructure, the danger and the violence on the streets, the lack of social cohesion, the forgotten poor, and the air of depression in the air. Some high-profile commenters are also speaking on this. I saw Konstantin Kisin on the Chris Williamson podcast. He made some good points about the net zero madness, our anti-aspirational governments that's suffocating our talent, the wokeness, the mass censorship, a lost and betrayed working class. But still, it seemed to me he was ignoring the elephant in the room. Kisin, like other mainstream commenters, was ultimately making the point that all the talent in Britain, anyone who's got money in Britain, is moving to the USA, Australia, Canada, Singapore or Dubai. To be brutally honest, I've always been wary of the types that move to Singapore and Dubai. That's ultimately because they're choosing the globalist world over their own homelands. They've essentially deracinated man. They will trade their hearts and souls for, I'm sure, what is lots of money, but I'd be aware of all that money. It tends to be 30 pieces of silver if you ask me. I feel the same way about the trend of Western men moving to Southeast Asia. Now don't get me wrong, I get why they're going. The standard of living is high, the women over there are feminine and aren't going to yell at you for being a man. However, in the long run, we're just decaying our own home nations. Those men are just going to get subsumed into Southeast Asia. But there's another problem with people moving to Western countries such as the USA, Australia and Canada. I'm sure America has a much higher standard of living. The Australians have a better lifestyle. The Canadians are maybe nicer people. But it seems to me, once you start searching online, that these countries in the Western world are suffering from exactly the same thing as Britain. It's just Britain is a little further down the tracks. Now, I thought I'd do a little mini test of my own on YouTube to see if the same phenomenon is happening in other Western nations with regards to these videos charting decline. But before I could even complete the sentence, look at the options YouTube gave me. Why are people leaving the UK, Canada, Australia, Germany, America, Portugal, on and on it goes. Now, the majority of these results are Western countries. On your screen now are the results when you type in why are people leaving the USA. You can see it's exactly the same thing. Granted, there's a couple of idiots stating they're leaving the USA because of Trump to go to Europe, not realizing obviously that in Europe we want exactly the same thing. We have the same populist discontent. Now this gets me to the core point. To turn a phrase, this is happening Western-wide. People can run, but they can't hide. All of this comes down to the core reason why I often conceptualize the problems that Britain faces in the context of the broader Western world. That's because, let's say, we got the ideal government in Britain. The reality is they wouldn't be able to do anything anyway because the globalist system wouldn't allow it. We have to understand that this problem is Western-wide and we're in this together. And this is where we get to the elephant in the room. As I said, all the points Kisin makes in this video, and I'll link it below if you want to check them out, are valid, but they ignore the core points. Number one is demographics. If you don't have any British people in Britain anymore, it's no longer Great Britain. I know that upsets liberals and progressives, I'm sorry, but it's the truth. The second key point is liberalism itself has replaced our tradition. We have two choices in life. We can have our tradition, which maintains our way of life, or we can have liberalism with all its freedoms and its niceties. However, those freedoms and niceties eventually place the will and whims and wants of the individual and the market over the collective. These are the harsh truths the West needs to come to terms with. And yes, if we want to maintain our way of life, there will have to be sacrifices. However, if we don't and we want to embrace globalist liberalism, become homo economicus, rootless deracinated man, then so be it. But I don't ever really believe the Western people have been given that option. Those choices have been taken for us. To be clear, I'm not saying this as some ethno-cultural purist. I do actually believe there is a space for, quote, cultural enrichment and even immigration if the numbers are small. What I mean is, it's fine to accept small numbers of people who can bring us Italian food, Vedic mysticism, French fashion, German philosophy, yoga for the ladies. All these things are okay if they can integrate into the broader whole and they remain in small numbers in major conurbations. This isn't about hating other cultures, it's about respecting the integrity of cultures. It's about that yin and yang line between accepting in new vitality but not harming the whole. This is why in the West we see this as some form of proto-fascism, but outside of the West it's completely normal and natural, which is why even the Dalai Lama gets it.
The campaign to leave the European Union used one of your quotes in their posters. It said the goal should be that migrants return and help rebuild their countries. You have to be practical. It's impossible for everyone to come. And that was used in a poster by the Leave campaign. What did you make of that?
When you see number of people from Africa go to Europe. At that time, you say, I express Europe for Europeans.
Some people say in the spirit of immigration, saying something like Europe for Europeans isn't a welcoming statement to make in this current era, where there's so many, 70 million people displaced at the moment in the world.
Limited number, okay. But whole Europe eventually become Muslim country, impossible. Or African country, also impossible.
There's nothing wrong with that, is there? I mean, you're a refugee yourself.
They themselves, I think, better to their own land, climatically. Much better. Europe too cold.
My parents moved from India to the UK. That's now their home. That's okay too, isn't it? If Indians or anyone else wants to live in Europe?
I think England, the small island, 90% become Indian. Then I don't know.
An evil fascist Nazi if I ever saw one. Of course, the reality is that this journalist has been trained in Western liberal progressive ideology. In normal circumstances, she'd call anybody making these points a racist, but she can't do that to the Dalai Lama. Some people say we shouldn't be frightened of being called a racist, and I know that's true for many of us who don't have career ties. However, we have to remember being called a racist is a serious accusation in the modern West. It can cost you your job, your social reputation. It can even get you hounded online for years, and you may not have even done anything other than say Europe should remain majority European. So what can the West and Westerners do? Well, I believe it's time to start pushing back a bit and preparing for the future. And no, I don't mean any form of violence or riots. I don't agree with that in principle, but second of all, if anybody even tried such a thing, they'd be immediately made the bad guys. Keir Starmer and his ilk would remove all sorts of pedos and criminals from our jails, so you can go and languish in their cell till they break you spiritually and mentally. Secondly, when you have trouble on the streets, it tends to involve different groups that have come here. Now, I'm fully aware that many of the groups who've come here haven't acted like angels, to put it mildly. However, fundamentally, we have to remember it isn't the immigrants' fault themselves. They have been brought here by a globalist elite and a globalist ideology, and that's where our attention should be. The immigrants and mass migration is just a symptom. In this regard, we need to start challenging what the YouTuber academic agent calls the boomer truth regime. I believe he puts that between Winston Churchill and John Lennon, and what he means is the British and Western cultural consciousness survives on the idea that we fought off the Nazis in the Second World War, and henceforth we are good centrist liberals. These ideas have to go because it means that anything even mildly right, even mildly conservative or traditional is immediately grouped in the description of fascist. When it comes to John Lennon and his supposed magnum opus, the song Imagine, we have to start challenging the views therein. It's essentially a hymn to globalist liberal materialism. No countries, no borders, no religions. These are inhumane visions of humanity. We have our belief systems, we have our cultures. It is natural to want to maintain one's borders. I know John Lennon is beloved in the British and maybe the Western cultural consciousness, but the harsh truth is he was a radical proto-woke leftist who was happy to preach down from his mansion at the rest of us on the floor, telling us how we should live. In many ways, he's the prototype for the modern woke liberal celebrity. It's my belief that we need to awaken Western tradition, not out of some sense of hate, but of love. What I mean by that is we need to start promoting healthy masculine values to give a sense of meaning in life to our men. We need to re-implement boundaries that give us a sense of wisdom in how to deal with life. We need to deal with our own shortcomings and challenges first, so we can deal with the modern chaos all the better in a sense of security, confidence and peace. In my view, this is the best way to challenge globalist liberalism, a liberalism which is taking apart other traditions too, which may mean there are opportunities for uniting against the corrosive effects of liberalism. A liberalist system which seeks to deracinate us, to make us soulless batteries in a globalist system, rather than sons of nation, sons of culture, sons of tradition, and sons of God. These are just my thoughts. Do check out more on the Substack. Also, do let me know your thoughts down below, and consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.